sure we are going to be very inspired by this very unique dialogue that is going to be probably different from all the other dialogues that you have been seeing around. So whenever you're ready, we can start.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kim Pullman, co-founder and chair of Reboot the Future. I'm super happy today to be co-hosting this with Learning Inspires. First, let me just explain a little tiny bit about Reboot the Future. I helped establish it a few years ago after publishing a book, and we encourage new thinking around a modern version of the Golden Rule. We took the idea of doing to others what you want done to you to a new level of doing also all that good stuff to the planet, just as you would like to be treated. In other words, if you want to live, you need to help all kinds of life continue to live. This is really at the root of all that Reboot does through education, organized conversations, masterclasses, and artistic expression. It is also at the heart of today's discussion. And with this simple principle, you change hearts and purpose. This can have a huge impact on our food systems to make it less exploitative and instead more holistic. And let's hear from Ashwini now about our other co-host.
Bulavinaka, good morning, good afternoon, namaste, and bonjour, buongiorno aussi, for those. So we are like this multilingual, multidimensional, and multiple countries represented here today. So welcome everyone. I'm Ashwini, and I'm actually representing the Pacific side of the world. I come from the Fiji Islands, and I actually am very much linked to the food system through my own personal history, because my ancestors were people who came to cultivate sugarcane farms under the indenture system during colonial days. So I feel very privileged to actually be here representing these different dimensions that I carry in myself, and also very privileged to actually represent our small NGO called Listening Inspires, which is actually an initiative that came together during COVID times. Yes, we were getting very creative, and we were like, okay, all these crises and problems, so what is our role there as individuals? And we came up with Listening Inspires, which is an NGO that sort of strives to bridge certain gaps. We call it bridging. We are bridge builders, and we bring together people who are activists, people who are policymakers, and also we link them with something that's very innate in everybody who's present here today, with individual wisdom and also the wisdom of the universe. So we said, okay, we want to bring all these different kind of people who work to bring solutions in very creative ways. And we do facilitation, we do trainings, and we facilitate beautiful spaces like this dialogue where we brought together people from very different backgrounds today. And one last thing about Listening Inspires is we are kind of being a little bit ambitious in trying to create a new SDG. And this SDG is called SDG 0. Yes, indeed, SDG 0. And that's about love and joy. Because we said, you know, all this amazing work that we are doing, what is the foundation of it? And as Kim said, like we want to talk about interconnectedness. We want to do what we want others to do to us. And all this, I think, is very much ingrained in love and joy. So that's what Listening Inspires is bringing to you today. So over to Kim.
Just a quick word about the Food Systems Summit. At the heart of the UN Food Systems Summit is indeed that we are all connected, and that all parts of the food system are linked, and that everything we do around food has consequences, whether that be on our individual health, the quality of our water and soil, biodiversity, carbon emissions from production to distribution, income levels across the whole food chain, to name just a few. The summit aims to make a roadmap for the SDGs to eliminate hunger, boost nutrition, create more inclusive and healthier food systems, and safeguard the health of our planet. We all care about these things. This independent dialogue is part of the multi-stakeholder approach that the UN is taking for this food summit, and encouraging a collaborative approach to improve radically our food system. Every person on the earth is part of that food system. We all need to eat. We all need to change our food ways as a result of that. And back over to Ashwini.
Great. So basically for this session today, we thought we'll bring together people from various parts of the world, but also from various backgrounds, like people with, we have farmers on the call, we have policymakers, we have nutritionists, health workers. So you're going to be dialoguing with kind of a wide variety of people. And what we are going to come out with today, what we hope to achieve is whatever is coming from these dialogues, we would take this to the UN summit that's coming up, the summit on food systems, that would be in October. And we will break out in different groups and discuss these amazing ideas under different topics that our colleagues have put together. And this will all kind of be submitted as a report and let's hope that whatever you come up with today is actually going to influence the way the summit is designed eventually. And I just also want to add, we have actually people from Middle East, Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, North America, and also from Europe, of course. And that's what's going to make this dialogue quite rich. And not just that we bring different specialities and skills, but also we represent very different parts of the world where the food system is definitely quite diverse and different. So over to you, Kim.
Okay, and lastly, we'd like to introduce our curator, Sara Roversi. A few words describe her perfectly: energetic, creative, influential, fun, cheerful, and very busy. A few more words describe various roles that she has played: innovator, disruptor, entrepreneur, strategist, and educator. And a few more words describe what she's doing now. Sara founded the Future Food Institute based in Italy in order to change the food system in our world to be more sustainable through education, research projects, and disruptive innovation experiences. So perfect to have her as curator today, because what we want to do is try to disrupt through a new value system. She works with youth as well as seasoned leaders. So we have this diverse group today, and it's great to have Sara with us. Her passion makes her perfect for today's discussion. Thanks a lot, Sara, and it's over to you.
Mamma mia, Kim, after your presentation, you're setting very high expectations.
We know you'll live up to it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here today. And sincerely speaking, I've been joining many different dialogues, but every dialogue is very focused on talking about skills, talking about what we have to do, business plan, or anyway, strategical things that are just talking about maybe technologies or innovations and this kind of solutions. But I think that the beauty of this dialogue is that we're going to talk about the essential needs. We're going to talk about values. We're going to talk about the pillars. And I think that the journey that we had the chance to live together with Reboot since the beginning of the pandemic, I think have been teaching us so much. So together with Kim and also Carlo Giardinetti, the Dean of Franklin University, exactly 1 year ago, we started a journey that was called Good After COVID-19, really to try to find out some learnings and not waste this crisis and try to restart from the most essential needs for humanity and to find the perfect balance between humans and the planet. And we had the ambitions really to rewrite a Marshall Plan for the planet and to understand how really the golden rule can become the real crucial driver that can teach us how to restart in a good and positive way. And so together we were trying to craft this manifesto. And today, of course, we would love you to join us in this journey and help us to debate and understand better from where we have to start. And I think that the values are really the starting point. I think that during this pandemic, we have been learning so much. And we have been learning that talking about ecology is not something that is just focused on environmental sustainability, but we need really to understand the complexity of food systems. And when we talk about food, we talk about the nexus of the society. Food is energy, is nourishment, but is also connection, family, rituals, identity, culture. Food is part of our history, and food is really kind of a language. You don't need to speak the language of your neighborhood, but through food, you can connect. You can show you are caring about others. And food, for many years, too many years, have been treated just as a commodity. But food is not a commodity. Food is care, because through your food choices, even if you're an entrepreneur, a startupper, a scientist, a teacher, or a mom that has to decide what to cook for his kid every single day, anyway, you can show you're taking care of the people you're nourishing, taking care of the planet, choosing the specific production or a specific crop or a specific farmer, but you can also take care of your community. And so I think that this is the perfect place from where to start. And today, of course, I think that we have a very, very important role and a strong responsibility. Now, to kick off this journey, we have two friends of this group, and I want to start with Jonathan Porritt, because Jonathan Porritt is the co-founder of the Forum for the Future. He is really a veteran campaigner, and really he has been inspiring generations of activists, people caring about the planet, and people who wanted really to start from finding this balance between humans and the planet. A crucial starting point to redesign the world under the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is going to be a big responsibility for all of us, but I think that is the right kickoff for this journey together. Jonathan, I invite you to join me on stage.
Sarah, thank you very much. And thanks to Kim and Ashwini for facilitating getting us all together here in this quite amazing space, which I am celebrating the diversity of right now. And it's certainly very, very timely to be thinking about the Food Systems Summit in this way, I must admit, because as many of you will know, the preparations for the Food Systems Summit have not been untroubled. They've been quite difficult in many respects. Actually agreeing exactly what the summit is set to achieve or what one might aspire for it to achieve has not proved an easy thing to nail down. And there are so many different voices now seeking to have their voice heard loud and clear. And to a certain extent, unexpectedly, but perhaps a bit disappointingly, the various protagonists in discussions about today's global food system are tending to double down on their existing positions. I see at the moment as much of a tendency to polarization as I do a tendency to build consensus and think very differently about what the Food System Summit could actually achieve. Now, I say that's not surprising, because this is a big story that we're addressing here today. It's interesting that if you think about it, the food system as such has rarely been seen in quite the same way as it is seen today. And for an awful lot of people engaged in many different aspects of the food system, both from the production end and the consumption end and the land management side of things, that system has been revealed more and more convincingly over the course of the last 5 years as one of the greatest drivers of destruction on planet Earth, perhaps in the eyes of some, the greatest driver of destruction on planet Earth. And we're just getting to grips with that, really. We're trying to understand precisely the extent of what that means and what we need to do about it. And deep down, underpinning all of this, of course, where a place where we often don't go, is a really massive philosophical story that we have to unpack. Because the food system today, as it is essentially structured across the world, is premised on a very powerful but very dangerous belief system, which is that the best way of producing the food that the world needs is to continue to command and control the natural systems on which we all depend. That command and controlled mindset, you can track it right back to the start of the Industrial Revolution, but of course, given a particularly powerful articulation after the Second World War in the last centuries, we began to think through the model of progress for humankind. Set against that paradigm of command and control, bend the will of nature to our own idea about what prosperity and progress looks like. Set against that is a very different philosophical model, which is much more about co-creation, much more about finding more effective ways of working with the forces and the rhythms and the richness and productivity of nature, not just to meet our needs, but to enable nature to thrive in its own terms. So to be asked to think about these issues through the lens of the Golden Rule is actually really valuable, because it forces us to step away perhaps from some of the stereotypes that we often bring to these debates. And I've really appreciated that, because it means that we have to think very carefully about the values which the Golden Rule invites us, exhorts us all to put at the heart of the work that we actually do. And in particular, preeminently, the values of empathy and compassion. And that, it seems to me, will be an immensely helpful guide for our discussions today, to think about that. The reason for saying that is that we've seen in the world of values and how people think about things, we've seen the same kind of phenomenon that we've seen as biodiversity has been impacted more and more by farming. People often refer to what is called the shifting baseline syndrome. The notion that we can barely get a grip on the historical effects of much of what we do on the earth today, because we very quickly lose touch with what it used to look like in the past. And that is true of values as well. We've got some shifting baseline syndrome problems around values. And if you think about it, and I don't say this now pejoratively of those who've shaped the food system, but if you think about it, we have simply normalized three astonishingly powerful forces that have brought us to this impasse today. And because we've normalized it, we often don't take this stuff carefully enough into account. So firstly, we've normalized the whole story of exploitation of other people in the value chains on the basis that cheap food is necessarily the best thing for the whole of the world. And that exploitation now is systematic across the entire food economy. Secondly, we've normalized the whole notion of extracting wealth from the natural world, regardless of the consequences for the longer term, extracting from soil, from water, from biodiversity. And that extractivism is deep in the value system of what makes the modern agricultural enterprise work or not work. And thirdly, of course, we have normalized astonishing levels of cruelty. Astonishing levels, to billions and billions of farmed and imprisoned animals every year. And yes, there are a lot of people who do not see that as normal. They see it as very abnormal, but that's what we've succeeded somehow in doing. So the values piece often gets overlooked, as you know, and that's, I think, what this dialogue today, this conversation today is all about trying to put that back at the heart of the way we think about the future of our global food system. If I may, Sarah, I just want to end with a quick reminder, because I was thinking about what this meant. Essentially, it means extending the circle of compassion, a phrase that many people have been deeply inspired by, whatever its origins may be, and there's some dispute about that. But I love the way that Albert Einstein used that, because he said, we are so stuck in this current paradigm. We have this optical delusion, as he called it, this sense of being separate from the whole of the rest of life on Earth. And he referred to that as a prison, and went on to say that we will only escape from that prison if we are able to extend the circle of compassion to every other life form on this planet, and to celebrate the beauty and diversity of the Earth. And that's what today is about, is how best can we help in our own ways to widen the circle of compassion.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. And I think that the call was to go from listening to action, and you were really able to set the stage to go from listening to action in all of that. And now, before we start with, say, rolling up our sleeve and joining the breakout room, we have another amazing speakers joining us for this kickoff. That is Mira Jackson. She's the founder of the Global Being Foundation and an expert in the UN Harmony with Nature program. Mira, the stage is yours.
Thank you. And it is Myra. So let me bring in the sound of that. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
So sorry. Thank you for telling me.
Not at all a problem. I think what I'm enjoying already is how we've begun. So I've been listening to what has been shared so far to find out what I could actually offer. And what I offer is stepping back a little bit to just recognizing right in this moment that we're embedded in the living system of a living planetary being. And when we look at what's before us in going from listening to action, we open ourselves to that understanding of being a part of nature, and on this earth, a part of a living biosphere, that in every moment of our existence is providing us nourishment. Food is a small portion of what is required to walk on the earth as a two-legged creature. And all that is provided is sourced by this living planetary being. In recognizing the intelligence of it, which is something that is not in our gaze, that we're already part of a system that is intelligent. And our posture is one of listening, is one of collaboration at its highest. I feel we're being called into restoration of our relationship with the planetary being, and recognizing it not as machine, but as living and intelligent. What's happening, particularly with the pandemic? I believe the pandemic is an extension of a fragmentation and an aberration within human being that is now being disrupted. Who said we're calling for disruption? That was Sara, wasn't it? The care that we're talking about is a care that is innate in how we are enfolded in nature. Nature cares for us. We can learn about care from the planetary being. We can learn about sharing and caring and distribution from the earth itself. When the sun shines, it does so fully. everything in the mesocosm, the world we've created as humans, is derivative. It's derived from the earth itself. So if we can bring those principles back in today, one of the things we can also acknowledge is we've not been apart, even though we've been living under the assumption that Jonathan so beautifully outlined of a deep separation from this intelligence. We can't escape it. It's intrinsic to who and what we are. So guess what? It's happening right now that I find a part of the gruesome and the glorious is that with COVID, we've seen how far out we have separated from a relationship with the planetary being. The glorious part is Earth herself, is helping us restore relationship. And in the restoration, there's parts of the mind that have gone dormant and the senses that have gone dormant. Part of the listening is about a re-engagement, a firing up of the innate intelligence we carry as a species. We're very fortunate that we still have indigenous among us on the planet, people who live close to the earth, live in a relationship of this kind of awareness. But it's innate in all of us. And what I see evident in our conversations now, the fact that we're even beginning to consider the fact that we might have been in some kind of a aberrant form of separation, that even by the manifesto that's been written, there's a social contract being forged by humanity right now to recognize that which we're a part of. And it's good news. The planet is supporting us in finding what is sustaining and maintaining in relationship with her. There are laws. There are laws that are a part of our design, who and what we are in this whole system. And we're finding our way. Our senses are coming back online. And those senses allow us to access the sentient intelligence innate within us, a sentient intelligence that corresponds with every level of being on the planet. What's also coming back online is our empathic response. We're learning about the power of our heart. We're learning about the design and power of our own gut and how it corresponds to the soils of the earth. The good news is there's nothing we have to go and purchase off of any shelf, anywhere, that allows for the restoration. The restoration allows for us simply making space in our own awareness, in our own thinking and feeling to reconnect. And so what I appreciate deeply about this activity is the listening. We are coded to awaken in this time. And yes, as I say, it's both a gruesome and glorious time. So I'm grateful for COVID, the mother's great pause, allowing us to see how fast her design can restore Earth. Evolutionary biologists have been telling us that intrinsic within our own being is a sense of altruism and connection that allows us to be in cooperation and collaboration with the earth. So here we are. Let's get this dialogue going and see what we can imagine together 10 years out in terms of our food systems. Thank you for inviting me in today.
Thank you so much, Myra. I have to thank absolutely our host, the two hosts, Reboot, the future and listening inspires. So I'm grateful as well for being exposed to this amount of beautiful words and inspiring thoughts. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And now it's time to work. And I'm very excited because here we are, 27 countries represented in this group. Innovators, students, scientists, CEO of big companies, policymakers, scientists, farmers, the voice of really many big brains. I'm saying big because I'm sure that all of you that decided to invest your time and energies to contribute to this dialogue, you have bright minds that can help us to craft all of those suggestions that we really want to take as a kind of set of rules also
Has Sarah frozen for everybody?
Seems like she's frozen.
Yeah.
I'm back. Okay. Together with 200 thought leaders in the previous month. And today we are 60 people and we have 6 very important topics to debate. We all are gonna be focused on trying to answer to 4 questions. What we have to do from now on to achieve the goals we have in mind for the next 10 years ahead. Who needs to be involved in the dialogue and in the action? What are the obstacles that we're going to face? And what can each of us do to help to achieve those goals and to make this vision achievable? And the 6 topics we're going to be focused on, and the 6 themes are going to discuss 6 of the key pillars that we identified while working on this manifesto. Every group is going to be facilitated by a group of people that have been working, have been trained to help you to really grasp the most interesting insights. And at the end, of course, we are going to have time to debate and start to weave all your inspiring thoughts in a common view. I will remember which are the 6 teams, the 6 groups, and we have here a graphic helping us. So the first one is going to talk about care and compassion for ourselves, others, and natures, of course, are inherent to the way food is produced. 100%, yes. How we're producing the food, distributing the food, consuming the food, packaging the food, all of those actions are interconnected. But care and compassion for everything around us and for the nature are core part of the entire process. The second group is going to talk about renewed and deepened connection to the natural world, nourished by respect, by wonder, and state of listening. So we need really to understand what is guiding the transformation of our food system towards restoration and equity. The third group is going to talk about our food systems that are grounded in, let's say, grounded and very focused on different topics related to inclusion, solidarity between generations. And I think that in the past years, our generations have been living too much in silos. And now we need to move towards a much more diverse and intergenerational community and society. Of course, we need to think about youth, and we need to understand how youth can provide inspiration, energies, and contribute to this big transformation. But in the meantime, we know how much is important to care about the knowledge and the big value that elder people and senior people can give to contribute and to build a legacy for the next generations ahead. The fourth group is going to talk about education. It's going to talk about education, culture, and how we can really empower the broader society, the consumers, and not only talking about schools, but talking about education as we must be long life learner, learning in every moment of our life and never stop learning. The fifth group is going to talk about cooperation, empathy, communication. I love a word that is co-petition, learning how to work together, grow together, and really joining forces to achieve, I think that one of the most interesting of the 17 SDGs, that is the 17th SDG, partnerships. Partnerships to reach the goals. I think that all of us here in this room, we all know that without partnerships and without joining forces, we can achieve for sure the big goals we have. But we need to spread this mindset as much as we can, because still is not something enough spread at every level of the society. The sixth one is how much also citizens can be actively engaged. When I'm talking about citizens, I'm talking about families. Families sometimes don't think to be part of the economy, but all the members of the society must be deeply engaged to contribute to this big transformation we all need. And we all need to work together to find a sustainable lifestyle in balance with nature and our health as humanity. And the sixth groups from now on are going to work together. We have our facilitator that will have only 4 minutes at the end to report back the insights that are gonna grasp during this almost 1 hour of work together. I just remember to switch off the mic if you're not talking. And I invite you now to join the different breakout rooms, listen the others, build on top of what they're saying. So yes, and let's grow together. Let's weave together this conversation, respect other people's voice, be there with the open heart, open to learn. I'm super excited to jump in the different groups, share your ideas. Nobody's gonna be judged. And we really need to get in touch with your mind, your emotions, your heart, because this is the only way we can build a better future together. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you so much, Myra, and to our amazing host. Welcome back. The time was enough. Yes, no, never. All the dialogues I've done in the previous weeks were always like that. We were always feeling we had more things to add to the conversation. So now it's time. And so now I want to invite our amazing facilitators to start with sharing what we have been discussing in this hour together. If the first group is ready, I would love to invite the first facilitator to share your thoughts about the role of compassion, care, and listening in food systems transformation.
So thank you very much for this opportunity. We had a very diverse group, as in the case of other groups, but we started off to look at compassion and care, listening, etc., in different sectors, production, consumption, processing, and so on. And we felt that sometimes in production, there could be more, some participants felt there could be more love and compassion, especially in case of farmers. But when it comes to industrial agriculture and there is move away from, there is a disconnect between the land and the farmers themselves, then there is, we could say there is scaling down of compassion. On the other hand, if we look at consumption, then when we talk about moms feeding their children or cooking, etc., people cooking for their families, there is more care and compassion. But when it's larger kind of food processing, when you eat food that is processed, then there is that sense of disconnect. Going back to industrial agriculture, we also talked about whether technology, is there something called good technology and bad technology? And we said, well, the machines are there to help human beings rather than to dominate, and machines can be optimized to help farmers. But again, we see a lot of constraints and conditions in the food system. For instance, in a country such as Finland or in Nordic countries where the growing season is very short given the long winters, how do we maximize that kind of time to produce what we need? And it may not be adequate to grow crops because we want to reduce the import bill of that particular country. So meat production becomes the focus. And going into meat production and consumption, we talked about, is there something called as because that is a big debate about meat and also how it relates to climate change. And we question if there is something such as compassionate meat production and consumption. And one good suggestion was, well, rather than taking when you go shooting, take a bow and arrow and try to shoot a rabbit rather than going with all the modern hunting gear. And of course, we know that the kind of meat production systems that we have today, such as factory farming, are not as compassionate as they were when human beings started to hunt animals. One interesting thing that was raised was when human brain was evolving in the ancient times, we needed meat. For the human brain to grow, we needed that protein, but now we have other sources of proteins. And do we still need the meat for good brain development when we are growing up? And that was something. There are studies that show that that was the case, that humans needed the meat to evolve their brains. But now that our brains are evolved and now there are more opportunities, there are more options available for proteins, is it just a matter of habit that we're consuming meat? So can we have something known as educated compassion, where we can teach young people and children through experiential learning, through experiential education, give them a choice to kill a rabbit or kill a goat in front of them versus to cut a tomato. So that kind of experiential learning in the classroom, in schools, can perhaps shift those habits. And we talked of different kinds of educations for the youth, etc., that can happen. But we still keep in mind that we have these constraints and conditions, particularly given climate change and climate extremes that farmers face, that we need to support our farmers through teaching them sustainable land practices, land management practices. And farmers are already aware, particularly indigenous peoples, have this knowledge. And if we could draw on that and continue supporting their knowledge systems, that is that could help us to go a long way. So we talked about SDG 12, the role of production, responsible production and consumption. And in terms of what each one of us could do to continue to have or increase the compassion. And now I have to look through my papers, because what can be done? Yes, we talked about responsibility. So each one of us takes the responsibility to see food as not an object, rather than something that we have a relationship with. And we try to train our minds through the young ages, and try to go outside of the comfort zones of the cultures that we're raised in. And then we also looked at or talked about supporting farmers, because we just can't talk about agriculture in terms of farmers. In certain countries, it's really low paid labor that is tilling the land, rather than farmers as we usually understand it. And so some of the participants said that in some countries there are no trade unions, there are no laws protecting the food workers, and we have a difficult history of the food system in each of the countries that we come from, that we need to understand. And that was intriguing to understand the history of the food system, and from that to build upon how we can engage with different stakeholders such as farmers, appreciating the farmers because they have an encyclopedia in their own brains. So is there a way to connect farmers with the university and inspire more young people to get into farming rather than farming as a big business? So we need a systemic view and a solidarity and a self-education and acting responsibly. And we need to give subsidies and support to the farmers, such as EU has been doing, but also keep in mind that, you know, there could be unequal supports between countries. And we need to summarize, we need to really look at profiting from solutions, from producing solutions in the food system, rather than profiting from producing problems for the food system. And we need to look at the food system in a very holistic manner, including others that work and consume in the food system, and of course, nature.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vamala. I will invite the next facilitators to try to stay in the 4 or 5 minutes, because if not, we won't have enough time to come back together at the end. Thank you so much, Vamala. I think that compassion was the good starting point, and it's not easy to train compassion. So experiential learning and all the tools we will have to come together to teach the compassion to the society at every level. I think it's the key point. Now, let's jump in the second group, and we're going to talk about reconnecting and listening to the earth to guide food system transformation. Abigail?
Thanks so much, Sarah, and I will do my best to keep it short and also do some justice to the
I know it's tough.
The wonderful discussion we had. So let me just try to sum up. Thanks. You know, I would say that first our discussion started even in the introductions. You could hear how clearly everyone listens to the earth in their own way, but in very powerful ways. You know, in the work that they do and how they walk on this earth. I think there was some sadness to our conversation, honestly, as we talked about experiences of having gotten so far away from systems we know would be more sustainable, more organic, and more nourishing. But also, I think, ended the conversation on a note of hope, as everyone had their own very clear ideas about what we can do professionally, you know, what we can do personally to listen and to bring that deeper connection back into what we do, both personally and professionally. You know, we talked about some of the major challenges that we face, of course, from corruption and you know, and systems driven by profit, and frankly by domination. And then on a maybe a more personal scale, also the masks we wear, and whether or not we are comfortable revealing our own innate connection to nature, not just at home, but also in our professional settings, and how transformative that can be if we're willing and able to do it. We talked as well about, you know, wisdom and consciousness, and how climate change is incredibly difficult and shows how out of alignment we are, but is also perhaps breaking through and opening up new forms of consciousness, even in corporate spaces, simply by creating a necessity to adapt that may not have been there, or may not have been as clear before. And you know, we just talked, I think, about some really clear ways to move forward. You know, we talked about continuing to just open up these spaces, you know, things that are understood now more clearly as being true were not understood to be that decades ago. And so all of us, I think, in our own way, feel that things that right now may still not be widely accepted in terms of our deep and innate connection with nature and the intelligent being of the planet, that can change, that is changing, and we can all play a role in continuing in all the conversations we're part of to open up those spaces and to say things that need to be said. Education is part of shaping how we listen, who we listen to. There was a wonderful idea about Indigenous master classes. So, how can we learn from people who can show up and don't just have to teach and receive information with the mind, but can teach us how to work in a more holistic way. So how are we educating one another? And what are we valuing was another question that came up. There was this big sense of, as many of us, I'm sure, have encountered in our groups, ultimately really needing to get back to basics and redefining, what is wealth, what is health, what is happiness, what is development, and what do we value, and how all those things need to shift at the same time, for us to move into, into the space we need to be in for more sustainable systems. We talked about the role of spirituality, and the role that plays in listening. We talked about ritual, and rituals not just as something that are folkloric, but very tangible, clear ways of bringing our connection with nature into our daily lives, and how that's important in different traditions. We also talked a little bit about intelligence. Again, the innate intelligence of the planet, of trees, of waters, and how we can listen to that, and the role that can play in moving us forward as well. And ultimately, I think we had a shared sense that we still have a lot to do in terms of moving beyond ourselves in our daily lives, in negotiations, really thinking about who we represent as not just us as individuals, but ultimately being part of the whole. There was a sense that we need to continue to approach all of this with great humility. That we need to meet people where they are, meet organizations where they are, that ultimately, we're all part of this together, regardless of our perspectives. And we are all going to work together to shape a new understanding of what it means to live in connection with the earth. And finally, that there are, every day we have opportunities to take personal responsibility. Each moment is a choice. And we always have the opportunity to tune in and understand, what will this choice mean for the whole, not just for me? Will this choice do harm? And how can I move forward based on that? So it came down at the end, not just to systems change and transformation and these big organizations that need to change, but also to the role of personal responsibility. And I think I'll stop there. So thanks, and thanks again to our wonderful discussion group.
What you say reminds me that our transition must be integral. So we need to connect how we are, who we are, how we are connected with our work life, our life also out of home. So everything needs to be connected and integral. If not, the shift is going not to happen. Thank you so much, Abigail. Now let's talk with Kim, because we need to learn more on how we can support the youth. That I know is something that is really part of your mission, Kim, to be part of this transition.
Thank you. We had three topics that we needed to get through, and the first one was where we've come from. What have we inherited from our ancestors, and what has been good about that, and what has been bad about that. So I'll just make the list here quickly. Don't waste food. Unfortunately, we don't know where food comes from. There's a real disconnect between that, which means we lack appreciation for the process of growing the food. Youth in some places has absolutely no connection, and that farming is actually considered a terrible career trajectory. There was a strong feeling in the group that corporate industrialization has not been productive and useful. They sell us a story that's not necessarily true. In Michigan, there's a really good example of the revival of small farms that is strongly encouraged by the state, and there's a program that's called taste the local difference. So that's strengthening the small farmer and buying local. There's different parts to that program that I won't go into. One great concept was you should only draw from nature what you need. That's, of course, anyone involved in indigenous cultures will understand that that's very part of First Nation indigenous cultures. And this notion actually is in conflict with legislation policies in a lot of places. The next section, we talked about where are we going? What do we want to make sure goes forward? What are the good things? So there's this, the first thing we talked about was conceptual versus behavior, and that both of these things need to be clear about where we're going. We need to think within ourselves what's good, and then our behavior actually has to reflect that. Secondly, we can use this COVID time to reflect. A lot more people are cooking. Maybe some people have even started growing food. What have we learned during this time that we can take forward? Should be an understanding that food has a history. It's going back to that point, where does the food come from? And if we are sensitive to that, we will appreciate it more, really localize the food production. Again, the corporate problem. How to activate the compassion and empathy that is needed to change the food system. We need to do a lot more listening and a lot more storytelling. And then someone had talked about farm to plate, but corrected, and our concept actually right now is farm to wrapper. So let's go back to the farm to plate idea again, the localization. And then we need to question what we're doing, even challenging traditions. That's a constantly questioning, what are we doing and what are the consequences of it? Then the last section was, what are we going to do in the next 10 years? Should parents be reconsidering the food choices that they give their children and allowing them to learn more and evolve in what they want to eat and how their families as a total should be eating? Empower everyone to grow food, even if you just have a little balcony and you only can grow one tomato plant or grow some parsley or whatever. Everybody should grow some kind of bit of food, and there's a very powerful idea when the seed actually sprouts. There's a lot of examples of school gardens that are helping to promote this. Somebody also recommended, again, using this COVID time to poll and listen to people everywhere about how they feel about growing food, and what have they increased their understanding of that and the food system. Almost done here. In support in Denmark, there needs to be a support of agricultural regeneration, more diverse markets that will support small farmers, and then really stop. There was again a call to stop the food system from being controlled by a few. And then start with ourselves, both in our thought, but also with our own garden. We quickly got into obstacles for making a change in the food system: funding, embedded systems in politics, false solutions, lack of motivation by individuals, fear, and going too much inward and not thinking about the rest of the world and the consequences of our own decisions. So that was our group.
Thank you so much, Kim. I think we have content to write books and many other things out of these dialogues. And actually what you have been highlighting is that the key pillar is listening, learning, education. This is really the starting point and connects us to the next group that is 100% focused on education. And every time we're talking about food and education, I'm only hearing people talking about how we have to eat. But people don't consider all the tons of values that we can find behind food, because we have been talking a lot about how food is the nexus of the society and how not only food literacy can enter in the schools, but you can talk about those things, talking about history, geography, and all the other things that you're teaching in the classroom. So please, Ollie, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And that is exactly what we were talking about when we started, was what is food education? You know, is it just about nutritional knowledge, which is very important, and learning how to be healthy and how to look after our bodies and make sure that we are primed and ready to learn? But it's much more than that. It's about establishing the connections between food, between cooking, between farming. That's really key about making sure that young people aren't just going into school and learning facts about nutrition and sitting there trying to memorize things, but actually experiencing food and actually learning in a way that isn't just knowledge or facts, but much, much deeper than that. And what that took us on to was then talking about, well, where do we learn? It's not just about school, actually, but we ended up, I think we came up with about 8 kind of different areas in which people learn about food and where we should be learning about food. That included places like the government, you know, who have a responsibility to be creating policy and policies and kind of funding that make sure that we can learn about food and we're learning about it in a way that's healthy, and also that young people are being provided with healthy, safe food. We also learn about food from home and from parents. And there was a beautiful moment where we were talking about pregnant mothers being a really great example of learning about looking after not just yourself, but others, and really listening to what your body needs and wants in relation to food. Schools obviously are a very, very important place for young people to be learning about food, but they're not the only place. We also talked about the responsibility of corporates, actually the way that they can use labels, packaging, marketing, you know, advertising that could be used for good and for education around food. We talked about people like us, NGOs, people working in this industry, coming together, collaborating, synthesizing, about the role that chefs play and farmers and thought leaders in the industry. The idea of making it fun, that food learning shouldn't just be, like we say, those facts, but it should actually be this fun, exciting place that young people want to engage with. And then we talked about the food itself, actually what food can teach us about ourselves and how we want to be able to learn from the environment about where we live, who we are, how we should be looking after ourselves. And we ended by talking about, again, coming back to the sense of fun and how children have ownership over food, and children are teachers as well. So they're not just the ones learning, but they are actually the ones teaching us, and we can learn from them in the way that they play, in the way that they engage with nature. We talked about sort of gaming and how food and education and learning can all kind of tie into this sense of fun and excitement. So that's kind of where we sort of ended up, is looking at all the way that it's actually food education has so many pathways and is incredibly sort of mainstream and should come from everywhere. We may have lost, in a lot of ways, this kind of ancestral knowledge that used to be handed down through generations, but actually we can rekindle that, and we aren't just looking at that coming from one person in our community or from a parent to a child, but actually all these various different places that it comes in and informs us about ourselves and about our connection to food. And then we ended just by talking about the fact that actually food is important for learning. You know, if you're not eating well, then you're not able to learn. And so that's just another very important note just to end on there as well.
Almost the 10 commandments for food. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. And of course, when I'm in this kind of gathering, I'm always excited because I feel that everyone around me is feeling the same things that I'm feeling, is also thinking how I'm thinking. But then we know that this is not the reality. And so I'm super positive generally because I said, okay, we are going on the right direction. But then I go out there and it's not like that. And the next group is going to talk about partnership and dialogue. And I think that the big challenge also for the food system dialogues is really to try to connect the ones that are not thinking like us, that are voting for the opposite part, that are in the environment where we don't want to go, and start the conversation also with the ones that we consider diverse people that are not aligned with our missions and so on. So I strongly believe that partnership and dialogue is really one of the most critical elements. Chris, please tell us what you've been talking about.
I wish we had all the answers. There were only, I think, 8 of us, 9 of us. Great group, and I wish we had more time. We really did run out of time because we're having such a rich conversation, almost as rich as the opening statements from Jonathan and Myra. It's just a very, very helpful group. We talked about partnerships, key elements of partnerships where governance and legal regulatory frameworks play such a key aspect of how real life relationships in value chains, in markets, in that whole producer to consumer chain. The reality is we have huge market domination by a very small number of retailers and consolidators. And we had some suggestions about the importance of really targeting those power imbalances and market dominance to really give those at the producer level more options. Now, where does partnership come in? Partnership comes in by discussing everybody in those chains, having a chance to have an open, transparent discussion. And we know how hard that can be when it comes to issues, complex issues like land tenure and land governance. You really need structured conversations that are inclusive, that are transparent, that are based on respect, and look at, there are many ways to look at, including territorial dialogues and others, but it's really the bringing in human values into the conversation, empathy being at the center, equity, respect. Communication has come up in previous speakers' summaries, but back to this key item of listening to not only each other, but to the earth and Mother Nature. And you need really to everybody has the right intention to listen, but it's really making sure that there are platforms, structured dialogues, and processes that go beyond just the wishful thinking of having an open conversation, to make sure it is codified and respected through processes. So again, education is critical, as others have pointed out, particularly local knowledge, indigenous communities, people who actually have their hands and feet in the dirt, in the water, who really know from generation after generation of how to protect biodiversity, how to ensure healthy, nutritious food systems, and eating the right things. And so we also talked about, people pointed out that there are opportunities out there, big picture opportunities, like the change of fossil fuel consumption towards that the whole energy market is changing, and it opens up opportunities for more equitable distribution of benefits, the opportunity for new jobs, new economic benefits, livelihoods being improved. So another one last point, while we all see the benefits of positive partnerships, right? We all sort of come to this conversation thinking partnerships are always positive. It's not necessarily the case. There has to be a pretty clear and open discussion about expectations, about key principles. And in that light, I'm going to share in the chat something that was produced by the CFS High-Level Panel of Experts, which is a report on multi-stakeholder partnerships. It's a lengthy report, but it's very much worth your time, those of you who are involved in trying to create such partnerships. There's also the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition, which the committee adopted in February, which is a negotiated policy document that is comprehensive about food production, the contribution of food to human health, positive and negative, and of course, its impact on the environment, both climate, biodiversity, and other aspects. So in conclusion, I would say that I think we generally came to, or at least we discussed how problems are easy to identify. We can all point to dozens, if not hundreds or thousands of challenges in this space. But to remember, we are looking long term. We as a group are looking to 2030. The summit is a way to re-energize, reboot, retool, and get us looking 10 years down the road. What is the vision we all want to see, and how are we individually and collectively going to contribute? So it's, everything you put in your mouth, everything you consume, it starts individually, but think of the vision you want to see and be that future. So I hope I captured in good faith the the great discussion we had. So back to you, Sara.
Maybe we should go to number 6. That would be Anthony.
Hi, thanks, Kim. In lieu of Sara, we had a very a super interesting conversation, which was definitely approaching a kind of form of synthesis as we got to the end.
You've just gone on mute, Anthony, for some reason.
How's that?
Yep.
As I look at my notes here, I can see that the words I've underlined are slavery, democracy, and soil, and those seem to be the kind of the strongest themes coming through. We started with a supposition about how do we get back to traditional ancient wisdoms, how do we try and revive the kind of indigenous farming techniques of our ancestors, or indeed are those even practicable, are they compatible with industrial farming methods? And there was a kind of clear reflection from some people in the group who have direct farming experience that those regenerative pathways are hard. It's hard to make that transition. It's hard to incentivize people who make their lives on the soil to make that shift. And indeed, some hardcore regeneration practices are almost kind of impossible or destructive to reach. So the question would be, how do we motivate people to make that transition of values? And I think part of the sense was that we have to provide examples. We have to provide markers to show people paradigms, how this can be done. But having provided the paradigms, we also need to incentivize them. And that is really, it's one about, this is where the democratic aspect comes in. So it has to be about participation. We have to open the floor to more voices than we currently hold. There was a kind of clear recommendation that many of the dialogues are dominated by public sectors and large NGOs, and we need to favor more voices from the producers and consumers. Okay, we need to actually make people feel that they have got skin in the game and bring other voices into the decision-making process. So if this were a dining table that we were all sat around here today, who's not at the table? Okay, who's not getting something to eat? Who's not having their voice heard? We started on looking at the praxis of, we started off thinking about how do we put food at the center of our conversations? How do we motivate a sustainable society that's based around food? But actually we did a deeper dive, and one of our speakers said that we should look at soil. So really look at soil as the kind of core determining factor for establishing an earth matrix, looking at a kind of a global system of values, and trying to use soil as the lens through which we approach all the complexity and interrelatedness and interconnectedness of the big system change we have to affect. And to try and facilitate that democratic sense and that democratic participation, we have to look at true value. So we have to say, what are the true hidden costs that we don't like to talk about in terms of land use, in terms of people impact, in terms of its impact on our health. We have to start finding metrics and a genuinely holistic earth matrix which can bring these things in. Typical matrices of evaluation, for instance, in GDP, are no longer practicable. One participant mentioned the fact that if you build a nuclear power station, your GDP goes up. And if the nuclear power station has an accident and you have to spend money to clean up the mess, your GDP continues to go up because you're still spending money. So clearly we've been captured by a system which is not practicable or sustainable. The traditional Roman method of agriculture, which we inherited to a certain extent, it was based on slavery. We are still in real effective terms, using a modern form of slavery for the delivery of food, but that traditional system was wedded around the making sure that food production kept apace with demographic growth. We no longer have to be contingent upon that marker. It's much more, it's rather than about keeping pace with growth, it's about keeping pace with distribution. So distribution, democratic participation, these are the key ways we get values change going. And there was a reference, this kind of brought us back to those ideas of ancient wisdoms, spiritual practices, the current engagement with the Laudato Si and the economy of Francesco, and the use of how do you get farmers at a very deeply localized level to feel that these practices aren't being imposed on them for change, but something that they have traction with and engagement, and somehow using these ideas of spiritual practices could be part of that process as well. The question was asked, how many of us use the watershed or the well-being of our watershed as our true marker? And I think that has a nice both poetic and practicable analogy that we could bring to bear both in our individual and collective practices. And the last point we came directly affirming this process itself was the UN consultative processes, and saying that we need to open these up. Okay, we can't assume that everyone's going to get to the COP in Glasgow, and indeed let's assume that they won't. So actually, how can we use new technologies, new participatory fora and dialogues to make sure that we are capturing all these diverse voices? Because like any biosystem, the richer the ecosystem and the richer the soil, the stronger and more resilient it gets.
Thank you so much, Anthony. So I think that through your 6 groups, now we have not more clear ideas, because there's so much to do. It's not easy to understand from where to start, but for sure we are understanding where we're going to go, why we're doing what we're doing, where we can learn how to do it, and with who we want to do it. Because I think that understanding that we need to surround ourselves with the big diverse group of people, and being able to connect the dots, and being able to advocate and talk with policymakers, advocate and talk with youth and people around us, it's really the starting point. I think that this pandemic has been able to make visible what was invisible. Before, Myra was saying, I'm grateful for this pandemic. I personally completely changed my lifestyle. I completely changed my rhythm, and I hope I will be strong enough not to go back and repeat what I was doing before, because what I've been learning for myself has been a blessing, and I've been, say, surrounded by people that was pretty much sharing the same feeling. And I also think that is the perfect time, because we're all being reset. And now in every sector, we are all focused on the restart. We are doing it for schools. We are learning how to teach in a different way. We are doing it with governments. Every government now is strategizing the restart in a different way. And business as well has been completely disrupted. So talking about how might we reboot the system, how might we reboot the food system, that today we understood really is the nexus between the planet and humans and our needs. And how might we start really listening and understanding what the world, the environment around us is teaching us. I think it's really the crucial point. Thank you so much. But before our end, I really would love to use these last minutes to ask our host, our keynote speakers, to summarize some thoughts, because I think that I don't want to lose the opportunity to hear, like, for example, from Jonathan Porritt, some thoughts about what you have been hearing during this last part of the session.
Sara, thank you very much indeed, and listening with great interest to that feedback. It's an extraordinary wealth of insights that have been shared there, which I think will be really valuable. I don't envy anybody the task of bringing that all together. I think that the thing that keeps coming back to me is the huge sense of empowerment and inspiration that characterizes the lives of so many people working at the grassroots of this story about sustainable food systems. I mean, whenever you're with people in those organizations, whether they're farmer-based or NGOs or community-supported agriculture, whatever it might be, honestly, these organizations, they're just brimful of people who have understood the need to recalibrate our relationship with a living earth. And it's what characterizes their daily activities, what makes them such powerful exponents of doing things very differently. And then I think about all the way through to the sort of top of the pinnacle of the international global food system. And so many people at that level have no understanding of what is going on at the grassroots whatsoever, literally nothing. So one of the things that we touched on in our group, and I kept coming back to listening to this feedback, is how are we going to connect those people who make so many of these decisions as to the future of the global food system? How do we connect them up with the people whose lives show such a different source of quality and inspiration and love and compassion? That's, for me, something that came out very powerfully from today.
Thank you so much. And let's bring back the golden rule every single day, because if we start our day just remembering the basic rule, I think everything is gonna be better. And last but not least, I want to thank you all, because I know how tough it is in these days, find time to listen. And these 2 hours, I think, has been really enriching. And I want to thank Reboot and the host, really, because I think that Listening Inspire and Reboot, you have been doing a huge work. The entire teams have been working massively behind the scenes. And Kim, some words from you. Oh, you are on mute.
No, I was just typing my last word, which was the modern version of the golden rule, which I didn't say so explicitly at the beginning, which everybody can go away with, which is treat others and the planet as you would wish to be treated. It's a great modern version of a basic principle that is so universal. I'm sure everyone here recognizes it in one form or another. I've been working with this principle for the last 5 years, well, my whole life, but also the last 5 years or 4 years specifically, and it never ceases to get tiresome and constantly inspires others. It's easy to remember and yeah, easy to share with other people. So hopefully that can become the basis for the new food system that we all want to create. So thank you. You're all living it, and keep working, keep going, and we will be in touch.
Absolutely. And let's remember that each time we will gather around the table, also tonight or today at lunch, we are honoring our past, and we have to engage with the people sharing the meal with us around the convivium, but also every single bite is connecting us to the future. So really, thank you so much for joining us in this virtual table today. And I really hope one day we can meet in person, because now I strongly feel the need of reconnect also with people live. And I'm sure this is something that you all are sharing as well. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.